It started with something simple, a glance. Not the kind that lingers out of curiosity, but one that quietly asks a question. The apartment hallway was always filled with echoes, doors closing, footsteps passing, the hum of lives brushing against each other, but never really touching. Yet hers stood out. She had that calm presence that made everything else fade a little when she walked by. Poised, graceful, with a kind of beauty that didn't need attention to be seen. Her hair was always tied loosely, black strands escaping to brush her neck, and her eyes carried that gentle warmth that made you feel seen, even when she didn't say a word. At first, it was nothing more than small greetings, polite, distant, respectful. A nod when our doors opened at the same time. A faint smile when the mailboxes clicked in rhythm. But there was something in her eyes that kept me there half a second longer each time. A soft flicker of curiosity that mirrored my own. She lived alone. You could tell by the stillness of her evenings, the quiet clink of a mug against porcelain as she watched the sunset through her living room window. I'd pass by and notice her shadow moving behind the thin curtains, graceful, unhurried. The rhythm of someone who had long made peace with solitude, but hadn't entirely embraced it. One night, I came home late. The hallway was dim, only half lit by the pale glow of the wall light near her door. She was there, crouched down, struggling with her grocery bag. It had torn, and the apples rolled away across the floor. I knelt beside her without a word, helping gather them one by one. When our hands brushed, she didn't pull away. Her skin was warm, soft from the day's warmth, and for a brief second, her breath caught, just slightly. I looked up, and she was already looking at me. There was a stillness there, like neither of us knew what to do with that small moment. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice quiet, touched with that soft huskiness that comes from not talking for hours. "Anytime," I replied, standing up and handing her the last apple. And when she smiled, really smiled, it wasn't polite anymore. It was honest, unguarded, the kind of smile that makes the air around you feel warmer. After that night, the distance between our doors felt smaller. Sometimes, I find excuses to step out around the same time she did. Other times, she'd linger a moment longer at her door, as if waiting. It was never planned. It just happened. Two people living side by side, separated by thin walls and unspoken thoughts. And yet somehow, connected by the quietest thing of all. A look that said, "I see you," and a silence that asked, "Do you see me too?" It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind that feels softer than the rest of the week. The sunlight was pouring through the hallway window, painting the walls in gold. I had gone out to grab the mail, still half asleep, when I caught the faint aroma of coffee drifting through her open door. It wasn't just the smell, it was the sound of quiet music playing from inside, a melody that made even the air feel slower. She stood there, leaning against her kitchen counter, holding a mug in both hands. She looked comfortable, a white, oversized shirt, loose hair falling around her shoulders, bare feet against the cool tile. She noticed me before I could look away. "Good morning," she said, with that easy calm that people use when they've already had time to wake up and think. "Morning," I replied, trying not to sound too aware of how close I was standing to her open doorway. "You drink coffee?" "Yeah, usually." There was a pause, short but heavy with meaning. Then she smiled. "Then come in." I made too much. It wasn't really an invitation. It was more like a test. A quiet dare, reptina polite gesture. I hesitated, just long enough for her notice. She didn't say anything, just stepped aside, letting the sunlight stretch across the floor between us like a bridge. Inside, everything smelled faintly of vanilla and coffee grounds. Her place was neat, but lived in. Small stacks of books on the table, a cardigan draped over the armchair, and a half-finished puzzle by the window. She poured me a cup, her movements slow and deliberate. And for the first time, I noticed how graceful she was in the smallest things. The way her fingers brushed against the rim of the cup, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when it fell forward. "You're quieter than I thought," she said after a while, her eyes studying me over the steam of her mug. "I could say the same about you." Her lips curved. Not into a smile exactly, but something softer. "I've lived here 3 years. You've been here, what, 6 months?" 7, I said. I guess we're just slow at talking. Or just careful, she replied, taking another sip. The sunlight hit her face at that moment, catching the faint lines near her eyes. Not marks of age, but of laughter, life. I found myself memorizing them, realizing how rare it was to see someone who looked content in her own quiet. We talked for an hour about small things, books, the neighborhood, how she always forgot to water her plants. But somewhere between those small confessions, the air shifted. The distance between our words grew shorter. When I left, she didn't walk me to the door. She just said, "You know where I am," and turned back to her coffee. That morning stayed with me, because sometimes a single cup of coffee can taste like the start of something you never expected to want. It was late afternoon when the sky began to turn the color of slate. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath before the rain. I had been at my desk, trying to focus on work, but my eyes kept drifting toward her balcony across the courtyard. The curtains in her living room swayed in the wind, and through them, I caught the faintest glimpse of her moving, calm, unhurried, as though storms were something she welcomed. The first thunder cracked just as I heard a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find her standing there, barefoot again, her hair slightly damp from the early drizzle. She was holding a small potted plant, the one she told me she always forgot to water. "Can I trust you with this?" she asked, her voice warm but teasing. "Power's gone out in my place. I didn't want it to get knocked over by the wind." "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let her in. She crossed the threshold, the faint scent of rain following her. Her eyes wandered around my apartment, simple, clean, with none of the warmth hers had. "You keep it tidy," she said softly. "Almost too tidy, like you're afraid to let it feel lived in." I smiled, unsure what to say, so I offered her a towel. She took it, drying her hands, her fingers brushing mine briefly, a light touch that still managed to send a quiet ripple through me. We sat by the window as the rain began to pour harder. The world outside blurred into streaks of gray and silver. The storm wrapped around the building, muffling the city sounds until it felt like the two of us existed in our own pocket of stillness. "Do storms scare you?" I asked. "No," she said after a moment. "They remind me that everything passes. Noise, chaos, fear. You just have to wait it out." There was something about the way she said it that made me realize she wasn't talking about weather. Her tone carried the kind of heaviness that comes from living through things quietly. Heartbreaks, endings, maybe even the loneliness that comes from being too strong for too long. Without thinking, I said, "You don't have to wait alone." Her head turned slowly. The corners of her mouth curved upward, but her eyes stayed still, searching mine like she was trying to decide whether to believe me. The thunder rolled again, close this time, and the power flickered out completely. The room fell into dim gray light, just the soft glow of the storm reflecting off the wet windows. For a long time, neither of us spoke. She sat there, her shoulder just inches from mine, her gaze drifting outside. Then she said quietly, "You're not like most people your age. And you're not like most people, period." She laughed, low and genuine, and in that moment, the storm didn't matter anymore. Because the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything neither of us was brave enough to name yet. It was just past 10 when I heard a soft knock. Not hurried, not uncertain, but deliberate. I wasn't expecting anyone, and yet some part of me already knew who it was before I opened the door. She stood there in the hallway, wrapped in a light cardigan, her hair still slightly tousled from the evening breeze. Her expression carried that same calm confidence she always had, but beneath it, I saw something different tonight, a trace of restlessness. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The storm's gone, but my mind's still noisy." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She walked in, slower than usual, her steps soft against the wooden floor. The room was dimly lit, the kind of half-light that made everything feel closer. I poured her a glass of water, but she didn't take it. Instead, she looked around, her fingers grazing the edge of my desk, the spine of a book, the back of a chair, like she was tracing the shape of my space through touch. "It's strange," she said finally, her gaze drifting toward the window. I've lived next door to you for months, and somehow this is the first time it feels real. Like we're not just passing each other in hallways. I nodded. Maybe it's because I think, she said slowly, that you see more than you say. And I think, I replied, that you say less than you feel. For a second, it felt like everything might tip forward. The moment, the tension, all the unspoken things gathering between us. But she drew in a quiet breath and leaned back, breaking the pull with a small laugh. I shouldn't stay long, she murmured, glancing at the clock. I told myself I'd lock my door by midnight. Then you still have time, I said, my voice low, not meant to challenge, just a reminder that I wasn't going anywhere. She looked at me again, her eyes soft, unreadable. Maybe, she whispered, but not too much. And yet she didn't stand. The seconds stretched, the space between us warm and still. It wasn't about what would happen next. It was about the quiet truth that both of us already had. She hadn't come because she couldn't sleep. She came because being near me made the silence easier to bear. The next few days blurred into a quiet rhythm. Polite nods in the hallway. Soft greetings that lingered a little too long. Glances that said more than words ever could. We didn't speak much after that night, but the air between our doors carried a hum that neither of us could ignore. It was Friday when it finally happened again. The air was warm, sunlight filtering through the blinds and golden ribbons. I had been fixing something by the window when I heard the faint sound of her door opening. Then, her voice, calm, but with a hint of hesitation. "Do you have a minute?" I turned to find her standing there, holding a small picture frame, the glass cracked. "I dropped it," she said. "Didn't have the right tools to fix it." I gestured her in, motioning toward my small table. "I can take a look." As I worked, she stood close enough that I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, something soft and elegant, like jasmine in late summer. She watched me quietly, arms folded, her expression thoughtful. "You're patient," she said after a moment. "Most people rush through things. Maybe that's why things break." I replied without looking up. She laughed, that low, warm sound that always managed to settle somewhere deep in my chest. "You think everything can be fixed if you take your time?" "Not everything," I said, "but some things are worth trying." When I finished, I handed the frame back to her. She took it gently, but her fingers brushed mine, a slow, accidental graze that neither of us pulled away from. The contact was small, but it lingered, like a word left hanging in the air. Her skin was cool from the hallway breeze, her touch light but steady. For a heartbeat, we stood there, just two neighbors sharing a quiet afternoon. But underneath that calm was something deeper, something waiting. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice different now. Quieter, heavier. "You don't have to thank me," I replied. "You could just come by more often." Her gaze lifted to mine, eyes dark and unreadable. "You say that like it wouldn't complicate things." "Maybe some things are supposed to be complicated," I said, half smiling. "It's what makes them real." She didn't respond. Instead, she reached up, her hand resting briefly on my arm, not as gratitude, but as something more deliberate. The warmth of her palm spread slowly through the fabric of my sleeve, steady and grounding. "Be careful," she murmured. "You don't know what you're getting into." "Maybe I do," I said. "Maybe that's why I'm still here." Her hand stayed for a moment longer, long enough to make time feel different. Then she withdrew it, the softness in her eyes betraying the restraint in her words. When she left, the scent of jasmine lingered in the room. The picture frame sat repaired on my table, but it wasn't the glass I kept thinking about. It was the quiet electricity of that touch, and how something so gentle could speak so loudly. The evening air felt heavier than usual, still quiet, like the world was holding its breath. For 3 days, there had been no knock, no sound of her soft footsteps outside my door, no faint hum of her music drifting through the thin wall we shared. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Every time I passed her door, I slowed down. The hallway lights always seemed dimmer there, the space between our apartments longer than it used to be. I told myself to forget it, to move on with the week, but silence, when it follows something that once felt alive, becomes its own kind of noise. That night, just as I was about to sleep, I heard it a knock. Light, hesitant, like someone afraid the sound might carry too far. When I opened the door, she was there, not the composed, self-assured woman I was used to, but someone a little different. Her hair was loosely tied, a few strands falling out of place. Her cardigan hung slightly off one shoulder, and her eyes, usually calm, looked tired. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said quietly. "I just needed to see someone who listens." "You didn't wake me," I replied. "You never could." She exhaled, the kind of breath that carries the weight of something unspoken. Then she stepped in, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The room felt softer somehow, dim light from the lamp, the faint smell of rain from her coat, the small creak of the floor beneath her bare feet. "I've been trying to stay away," she said after a while, sitting on the edge of the couch. "I thought it would be easier." Was it? Her eyes flickered up to mine, not defensive, not distant, just honest. No, it just felt emptier. She laughed then, quietly, shaking her head. "You know what's strange? I'm older. I've seen more, I should know better, and yet, here I am, standing in your living room at midnight, hoping you don't think less of me." I sat beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel her warmth. "I could never think less of you," I said. "You just make me think more." The words slipped out before I could stop them. She turned to look at me, the faintest smile pulling at her lips, not playful, but grateful. Her fingers found the edge of the cushion between us, tracing it absently. "You make it hard to keep lines where they should be," she whispered. "Maybe lines aren't meant to stay still," I said softly. She closed her eyes, her head tilting slightly toward me, as if leaning into something she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. "You have no idea how dangerous that sounds," she murmured. "Maybe," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But maybe that's what makes it true." The space between us felt alive, quiet, fragile, and utterly electric. Her hand rested on the couch, just inches from mine. Neither of us moved. Neither of us needed to. Because sometimes the loudest moment between two people is the one where nothing is said, and yet everything is understood. The next morning began like any other, sunlight stretching lazily through the blinds, the faint hum of the city waking up. But something in the air felt different, lighter, expectant, the kind of calm that follows a storm, when everything has quietly rearranged itself without saying so. I found myself standing at her door again, this time without a reason. No broken picture frames, no storm, no midnight visit, just a pull, a quiet gravity that led me there. For a long moment, I hesitated, my knuckles hovering just above the wood. Before I could knock, the door opened. She was already awake, dressed in a simple gray sweater and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. The faint scent of coffee and something floral, maybe her shampoo, lingered in the air between us. Her surprise faded quickly into a knowing smile. "I was just about to come over," she said softly, stepping back to let me in. Her apartment looked different in the morning light, brighter, warmer. The walls, the soft music playing low in the background, even the half-finished puzzle by the window. Everything felt like part of her. Real, lived in, beautiful. "I didn't sleep much," she admitted, pouring a cup of coffee and handing it to me. Our fingers brushed, that same quiet spark, gentle but unmistakable. "I kept thinking about what you said last night, about lines." I took a sip, meeting her gaze. "Did you decide where they belong?" She shook her head, her lips curving into something bittersweet. "Maybe they don't. Maybe we just draw new ones." There was no tension in her voice now. No hesitation, no guardedness. Just honesty. The kind that sits deep in the chest and lingers long after it's spoken. We moved to the window, the city shining outside, the air still cool from the night's rain. She stood close, so close that I could feel the warmth of her shoulder brushing against mine. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think people only meet by chance. That timing decides everything. And now," she turned to face me, her eyes steady and clear. "Now I think people find each other when they need to be seen." Her words hung there, simple but full of something real. I didn't move, didn't speak. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us until it became something sacred. Then, slowly, she reached out, her hand finding mine with quiet certainty. Her touch wasn't a question this time. It was an answer. "I can't believe you're here," she whispered. And I smiled, my voice low and certain. "You invited me with your eyes." The moment lingered, sunlight warming our hands, the faint hum of the world outside fading into nothing. There were no declarations, no promises, just the soft understanding that some connections don't need words to exist. Later, as she leaned her head lightly against my shoulder, I realized that every silence, every look, every quiet hesitation had led to this. Not an ending, but a beginning written in the smallest, truest language two people can share. The space between heartbeats, where eyes finally speak what words never can.